So picture this. I'm 4 years old, sitting in the back of my parents' car at a drive-in movie theater. Now, I'm gonna date myself right now by saying back in my day, a drive-in movie theater was one of those things in the middle of somewhat nowhere where you would normally go with your friends, family, close colleagues, and go watch a movie. And the idea was once the sun would go down and you would watch the movie in your car, you would bring your own snacks and you would just have a good time. For me at this age, it was actually going to go see the 1989 Batman starring Michael Keaton and Jack Nicholson. And for me, there was no greater moment for me than when it went dark, the screen lights up, and the opening credits came out, and me seeing the iconic, legendary symbol of Batman. And to me, there is no greater hero out there than Batman. And for me, in that moment, my parents couldn't say anything to me. I was focused on the screen and nothing else mattered. And in that moment, only thing else I wanted to see in that movie was literally seeing Batman in his outfit and seeing him kick butt. So shortly into the film, Batman goes to save a family who was recently mugged. And in that moment, the story began. The story began specifically of how this iconic superhero, or hero itself, turns pain into purpose. So spoiler alert, Batman is Bruce Wayne. I have to say this specifically because even though Batman has existed for over 80 years, people still do not know. So I don't know why, but people still do not know, and that's okay. But think of it like this, on one side of it, this billionaire playboy by day, Bruce Wayne, and at night, it's this vigilante, literally the menacing figure that literally strikes fear into the hearts of every criminal in the city of Gotham and even outside of Gotham. And yet he chooses to do this night after night. But the question is the why. He can choose to do anything else with what he wants to do. And specifically for someone like Batman or Bruce Wayne himself, he literally has billions of dollars. But yet he still chooses to fight for injustice and fight for regular old civilians like yourself. The question still remains that would Batman still be Batman without his billions? And me personally, I think yes. I think if you sit down and really look at it, regardless of how much money Batman has, and if he didn't have his money, he still would be Batman. And here's the reason why. Many fandoms and blogs specifically debate of why, Batman is nothing more than just a series of, this person in a ski mask that decides to go out and just fight crime and everything like that. But if you think about that, you miss the real story of who Batman really is. Batman is a person who was transformed by trauma at a young age. Think of it as a young kid who unfortunately saw his parents murdered before him, and instead of choosing to go down a dark path, he decided to do something else, to stand for something else, to stand for an iconic symbol that not only gives hopes to people who do not have any hope, but then also strikes fear in the heart of those who prey on the fears of others. And think about the choices that we all have. So like I said, Batman is a product of the choices that he made. Specifically, Bruce Wayne, at a young age, had the choice of going down multiple different pathways. And instead, he decided to go down a pathway of becoming the iconic symbol known as Batman. And in these choices, I want you to think about the choices we all make. And the choices that sometimes of us dealing with an unfortunate trauma in our life, and instead of us going one path, we go a different path. And think about these choices and what makes you who you are. So for me, it was seeing choices like this of thinking about, what else could be done. And for me, it's also comes down to the question of why am I really fascinated with Batman at the end of the day? Because there's plenty of other superheroes or heroes out there. And more or less, I'm fascinated with Batman, not because of his cool car. I think it's probably the nicest car out there outside of a 1986 Mustang. However, he does have his mansion. However, as much as I would love to have his mansion, I think that it's too many rooms to clean. And right now, my fiance is always like, I don't clean our apartment, so that's not gonna happen, so. More or less, I'm fascinated with Batman because of his commitment. The fact of the matter is he is a human being that shows up night after night and decides to not just fight regular old criminals or cartels or mafia people, but also literally people that are superhuman, people with literally beyond powers. And instead of just relying on his gadgets, he literally relies on his intellect, his determination, and that inner code that basically makes sure that he doesn't go anything outside of the lines of just justice itself. And for me, I use that in my own personal inspiration to do many things in my life, past and present. And for me, thinking about the past of where I'm at right now, of using Batman specifically as an inspiration that put me on the pathway in my young years to specifically join the U.S. Navy. And for me, when thinking about, what it takes to be a hero, I always think about superheroes, but also think about even the men and women who specifically serve this country day after day and don't ask for a thank you sometime. And I think about the sacrifice and service they make day after day. And for me, I didn't want to join this to get a thank you. I joined this specifically for the fact of serving others and not just serving myself. Of sacrificing my time, sacrificing my life for the sake of others. And when I think about that and I think about Batman, I think about what else would I be doing in my life? As much as I would love to play video games all day, there's other things and more important things I could be doing out there in the world. So in thinking about Batman, of specifically seeing the trauma of going on in his life and specifically thinking about what happened to him at a young age, it is a terrible ordeal to see anything traumatic happen to anyone. Specifically as a young person, to see your parents murdered before you by a criminal that then helped to then shape and mold you into who you are. That is simply just terrible. And again, Batman made this choice early on to literally turn this trauma itself into some sense of purpose, to turn this now internal fear he had about being vulnerable into some sense of strength. And in doing so, he decided to embark upon his particular pathway into becoming who he decided to be. And in thinking about that, I want you also to think about some of the heroes out there and what have they faced and what led them to becoming who they are. Heroes historically have always turned trauma into purpose and fear into strength. And for someone like Batman, he uses this as his ally to specifically become not just another person in cape and cowl, but also this symbol that people can aspire to be. This symbol that people can literally look at and see hope. To specifically know that there was someone there to help and defend you no matter what. Now, backtracking a little bit to specifically talk about my educational background. So, specifically my educational background is in English literature. One of the books I had the fortune and pleasure of reading was The Hero of a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell. And within this book, it specifically talks about the hero's journey. And when you think about the hero's journey, there's multiple things that a hero has to go through to become who they are. One of which is the trauma, the trials, the tribulations, and then the transformation. Each of these things mold a hero into who they will become. And when I think about Batman, I think of all the things that have transformed him into who he is right now. Of going through the trauma at an early age, to going through the different trials of one training or searching through books and wisdom to get the knowledge of doing what he needs to do next. And then also the tribulations of having to balancing literally two lives, of literally running an out company at a young age to now fighting literally grown men and adults and superheroes and villains and everything like that. But all of this transformed him into who he is right now, and specifically the iconic character we know as Batman. But taking it away from the fictional aspect and taking it more into the reality of actual heroes in society. So as me being African-American born and raised in this country, I look to these heroes right here, of these heroes throughout time that even though some may not see them as heroes, I do because of thinking, go back to Joseph Campbell's book of this blueprint of what it takes to become a hero. Of all of them going through some sense of trauma, some sense of a trial, and some sense of tribulation in order to transform them into the heroes and the iconic leaders that we know to this day. And when you think about this, I want you to think specifically of how throughout time these heroes have always turned pain into purpose and also specifically of how they have not just stood for something more than themselves, but also stood as a symbol for others to rally behind and to fight behind as well. So the one thing I want to leave you with is this. How will you stand up in the face of your own challenges, resilience, and integrity, and challenge all this? And what I mean by that is specifically, how will you turn your own pain into purpose? Or how will you turn your own trauma into purpose? Or how will you leverage your own fear into some sense of strength? Because at the end of the day, the world does not need another billionaire in a suit. It needs ordinary people like yourself, willing to stand up for those who need help and be that symbol for others that they can aspire to be. Thank you.